A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Neutral Ground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Blackthorn estate as Evelyn adjusted the silver pendant at her throat, feeling the familiar warmth that pulsed through the ancient metal whenever territorial tensions ran high. At 26, she had built something unprecedented in the werewolf world. A territory that belonged to no pack, answered to no alpha, and somehow thrived in the spaces between three of the most powerful supernatural communities on the continent. The pendant had belonged to her grandmother, and her great-grandmother before that, passed down through a bloodline that had always stood apart from traditional pack hierarchies. Sometimes, when political pressures mounted or territorial disputes threatened to spill into violence, the silver would grow so warm it almost burned against her skin, as if responding to dangers that hadn't yet materialized. Blackthorn Enterprises occupied a gleaming tower that rose from the heart of her neutral zone, its glass walls reflecting the rolling hills that separated Moonstone Packlands from Crimson Falls territory, with Silver Ridge's domain stretching beyond the northern ridge. From her corner office, Evelyn could see the invisible boundaries that others feared to cross, lines drawn in blood and tradition that her family had somehow transcended for 3 generations. Her assistant knocked softly before entering. "Miss Blackthorn, Alpha Stone from Moonstone Pack is here for his appointment. He seems urgent." Evelyn's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile as the pendant grew noticeably warmer against her throat. Marcus Stone. She had heard whispers about the Moonstone Alpha. Powerful, traditional, and currently facing the kind of political pressure that made even the strongest leaders desperate. Her grandmother used to say that Blackthorn Silver responded to significant change approaching, and something about Marcus Stone's unexpected request for a meeting felt like the beginning of major shifts in territorial balance. "Send him in, Maya, and prepare the conference room. Something tells me this won't be a brief social call." The Healing Center's morning reports lay scattered across her mahogany desk. 3 pack members treated for territory dispute injuries, 2 successful mediations between rival families, and the ongoing expansion project that would double their capacity by winter. Her territory might be neutral, but it was far from passive. Every service she provided, every life she saved, every conflict she mediated, added another thread to the complex web of obligations and respect that kept her independent. The success of her neutral territory wasn't just built on diplomacy and business acumen. Though few outsiders understood the deeper foundations of Blackthorn power, her family's immunity to alpha commands had allowed them to serve as mediators for centuries. But that immunity came with responsibilities that grew heavier with each generation. The silver pendant wasn't just jewelry. It was a conduit for the territorial magic that had protected her bloodline since the first Blackthorn had claimed these lands from warring packs. Marcus Stone entered with the controlled grace of a predator, trying to appear civilized. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her office, he radiated the kind of alpha presence that usually made other werewolves instinctively lower their gaze. Evelyn met his stare directly, feeling the familiar sensation of his dominance sliding off her natural defenses like water off stone, while her pendant pulsed with recognition of another significant supernatural presence. Alpha Stone. She gestured to the chair across from her desk without rising. "You mentioned urgency in your request. I assume this concerns the escalating tensions between your pack and Crimson Falls." His eyebrows lifted fractionally. "You're remarkably well informed for someone who claims neutrality. Information is the currency of survival in my position." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity he was directing at her. The pendant's warmth was increasing, responding to something about this interaction that felt momentous. "Crimson Falls has been testing your border patrols for 6 weeks. Silver Ridge is nervous about the potential for spillover conflict. And you're here because traditional pack alliances won't solve a war that could devastate the entire region." Marcus settled into the offered chair, but his posture remained coiled, ready for action. "Impressive intelligence network. Yes, we're facing the possibility of open warfare. Crimson Falls Alpha believes might makes right, and he's been building coalitions to support his territorial expansion plans. So you need neutral ground for negotiations." Evelyn's tone remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Not negotiations. Marcus's jaw tightened, and Evelyn caught the scent of determination mixed with something that might have been desperation. An alliance. Marriage alliance, to be specific. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Evelyn felt the pendant grow almost hot against her skin. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When the silver burns, child, it means the old ways are changing. Be ready to choose between tradition and transformation." Alpha marriages were political contracts, designed to strengthen pack bonds and produce strong offspring. They were also traditionally agreements between a dominant male and a submissive female, with clearly defined power structures that had remained unchanged for centuries. "You're suggesting I abandon my neutrality to marry into your pack hierarchy." Her voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Interesting assumption. Alpha Stone. What makes you think I would consider such an arrangement?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his scent carrying confidence mixed with urgency. "Because you're smart enough to understand that neutrality won't protect you if this region descends into chaos. Crimson Falls won't respect your boundaries if they control Moonstone territory. Silver Ridge will align with whoever proves strongest. You'll be isolated and vulnerable. And you believe marriage to you would solve this problem." Evelyn stood, moving to the window that overlooked her thriving territory. The afternoon light caught the silver threads woven into her business suit, subtle reminders of the power that flowed through her bloodline. "Tell me, Alpha Stone, what exactly would you expect from such a wife?" "Partnership." The word came out rougher than he had apparently intended. Someone intelligent enough to understand pack politics, strong enough to earn respect, and practical enough to see the benefits of alliance. Evelyn turned to face him fully, and for the first time since he had entered, she let a hint of her own alpha presence show. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with power that made Marcus's wolf respond with attention rather than dominance. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized what he was sensing. Not the aura of a powerful beta, or even a rare female alpha, but something older and more complex. Something that carried the weight of ancestral magic and territorial authority that predated modern pack structures. "Immunity to alpha commands is not common among our kind," she said quietly, watching his reaction as the pendant pulsed with warmth. "Neither is the ability to hold territory independently. You assume I need your protection, Alpha Stone, but perhaps you should consider what I might offer you instead." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of recognition and possibility. Marcus's scent shifted, carrying the sharp edge of intrigue mixed with something that might have been respect, and perhaps the beginning of genuine attraction. "What are your terms?" he asked finally. Evelyn smiled, and for the first time since their meeting began, it reached her eyes. "That, Alpha Stone, will require considerably more discussion than one morning appointment allows. If you're serious about this proposal, you'll need to understand that any alliance with me comes with conditions that might challenge your traditional expectations." "I'm listening." "Then we begin negotiations properly tomorrow. Maya will coordinate our schedules." She moved back to her desk, effectively dismissing him while maintaining perfect diplomatic courtesy. "One more thing, Alpha Stone. I don't submit to anyone. If that's a problem for you, we have nothing further to discuss." Marcus rose slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "It's not a problem, Miss Blackthorn. It might actually be exactly what Moonstone Pack needs." After he left, Evelyn remained at her window, watching his sleek black car navigate the winding road that led back to pack territory. The pendant against her throat had cooled to its normal temperature, but she could still feel the lingering echo of whatever change it had sensed approaching. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had built power from nothing, who had taken the scraps of an old bloodline and forged them into something unprecedented. Tomorrow's negotiations would determine whether she could maintain that independence while preventing a war that would consume everything she had built. The silver pendant pulsed once more, as if responding to her thoughts. Ancient blackthorn magic, dormant for too long, seemed to stir with the promise of significant change ahead. Her grandmother had always said that their family's true power lay not in submitting to the supernatural world's expectations, but in transforming them entirely. Perhaps it was time to discover what that transformation might look like. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and possibility, and Evelyn found herself looking forward to tomorrow's meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the intriguing Alpha who had just challenged her to redefine what partnership could mean. Change was coming to the neutral territory. The pendant's warmth had made that clear. The question was whether that change would strengthen her independence or transform it into something entirely new. Chapter 2. Untamed Resistance. The morning air crackled with tension as Marcus Stone arrived at the Blackthorn estate for their second meeting. Unlike yesterday's diplomatic visit, today felt different, charged with the kind of energy that preceded either breakthrough or battle. Evelyn had chosen the main conference room this time, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of her territory, while the polished obsidian table reflected the morning light like dark water. She was already seated when he entered, dressed in a charcoal business suit that somehow managed to look both professional and predatory. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp lines of her face and the pale green eyes that seemed to see everything. The silver pendant at her throat caught the light as she looked up from the documents spread before her, and Marcus noticed it seemed to pulse with its own subtle luminescence. "Alpha Stone, please, sit." Her voice carried the same neutral politeness as yesterday, but there was something underneath it now, a hint of challenge that made his wolf pace restlessly. Marcus took the chair across from her, noting how she had positioned herself with her back to the wall and a clear view of all entrances. Everything about her posture spoke of someone accustomed to being in control of her environment. He had spent the evening researching everything he could find about the Blackthorn lineage, and the results had been both impressive and mysteriously incomplete, as if certain information had been deliberately obscured or protected. "I've given considerable thought to your proposal," Evelyn began, sliding a leather portfolio across the table. "If we're to discuss alliance through marriage, we need to establish certain parameters." Marcus opened the portfolio and felt his eyebrows rise. The document inside was comprehensive, a marriage contract that read more like a treaty between sovereign nations than a traditional pack alliance agreement. Terms and conditions were laid out with legal precision, covering everything from territorial rights to decision-making authority, with clauses that referenced ancestral obligations and bloodline responsibilities in ways that intrigued him. "This is thorough," he said carefully, scanning the clauses that would preserve her independence while providing the political alliance he needed. "My family doesn't enter into arrangements lightly." Evelyn's fingers drummed once against the table surface, and Marcus caught the faint scent of ozone in the air, as if electrical energy was building around her. Section 3 addresses the most critical issue, pack hierarchy. "I will not submit to alpha commands, yours or anyone else's. If that's a deal breaker, we can end this discussion now." Marcus looked up from the document, meeting her steady gaze. Something primitive in him wanted to test that claim, to see if her immunity to alpha influence was as absolute as she suggested. The scientific part of his mind was curious about the mechanisms behind her resistance, while his alpha instincts were both challenged and oddly attracted to the prospect of a mate who couldn't be dominated. Almost without conscious thought, he let his presence expand, filling the room with the kind of dominant energy that usually brought immediate compliance from other werewolves. "You will consider the terms carefully," he said, his voice carrying the subtle compulsion that made his commands irresistible to pack members. Evelyn's reaction was immediate and startling. She laughed, a rich, genuinely amused sound that cut through his alpha presence like a blade through silk. The compulsion that should have made her agreeable and compliant seemed to slide off her without leaving the slightest mark, while the silver pendant at her throat flared with brief, unmistakable light. "Really, Marcus?" Her eyes glittered with what might have been delight. "You couldn't resist trying, could you? How many werewolves have you met who can simply ignore an alpha command?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as his attempted dominance crumbled into embarrassment. In 30 years of life and 10 years of pack leadership, he had never encountered anyone who could brush off his influence so casually. It was unsettling, intriguing, and somehow deeply attractive all at once. "I apologize," he said, meaning it. That was inappropriate and disrespectful, but entirely predictable. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. though the steel remained in her voice. Every alpha who's attempted to negotiate with me has tried the same thing. You're actually the first to apologize afterward, which suggests you might be capable of learning. She stood and moved to the windows, her reflection ghost-like against the glass as she gazed out at her territory. The pendant continued to pulse with soft light, as if responding to her emotional state or some unseen energy in the environment. Do you know why I can resist alpha commands, Marcus? May I call you Marcus? The use of his first name felt oddly intimate in the formal setting. Please do. And no, I don't understand how it's possible. Bloodline. The word was simple, but it carried weight. The Blackthorn family was never meant to submit. We were designed to stand apart, to serve as neutral arbiters when the pack system inevitably created conflicts. My immunity isn't a quirk of genetics. It's a survival mechanism that's kept my lineage alive for centuries. Marcus found himself studying her profile, noting the aristocratic line of her nose and the determined set of her jaw. You're saying your family was created to be outside the normal pack hierarchy. Precisely. She turned back to face him, and for a moment the pendant's light seemed to reflect in her pale green eyes, which is why traditional marriage arrangements won't work between us. I can't be your submissive mate, Marcus. I won't pretend to defer to your authority in public or private. If you need a wife who will bow her head and follow orders, you're courting the wrong woman. The challenge in her words should have triggered his alpha instincts toward dominance. But instead, Marcus found himself oddly intrigued by the prospect of a partner who wouldn't yield to him. Pack life had always felt predictable. His word was law, his decisions were followed without question, his authority was absolute. The idea of someone who would argue with him, challenge his choices, force him to defend his reasoning was both terrifying and exhilarating. What would you expect from this arrangement? He asked, genuine curiosity replacing diplomatic caution. Evelyn returned to her seat, her movements fluid and controlled. Mutual respect, joint decision-making on matters that affect both territories. The right to maintain my independence while offering you the political alliance you need. In return, you get access to my intelligence network, my diplomatic connections, and the kind of partner who can handle pack politics without constant protection. And if I disagree with your decisions, if your choices conflict with pack welfare, then we discuss it like rational adults until we reach compromise. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Novel concept, I know, but surprisingly effective. Marcus leaned back in his chair, reassessing everything he thought he knew about alpha partnerships. The pack elders won't approve. They expect traditional mate relationships, clear hierarchy, defined roles, submissive females. The pack elders aren't marrying me, you are. Evelyn's tone brooked no argument. If their approval is more important than preventing a war that could destroy your territory, then we have nothing further to discuss. The dismissal in her voice stung, but it also clarified something fundamental about this negotiation. She didn't need him. She was offering him something valuable, but she could walk away without consequence. He, on the other hand, was running out of options to prevent the coming conflict with Crimson Falls. There's something else you should know, Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. My beta female, Sophia Clare, left for advanced training with a northern pack 4 months ago. She's expected to return soon, and we had a complicated relationship before she left. Evelyn's expression sharpened with interest. Complicated how? Personal involvement that ended when I realized it wouldn't serve either of our interests long term. Marcus met her gaze directly. I'm telling you this because I believe in transparency, and because any alliance between us needs to be built on honesty. Appreciated. Evelyn's tone was neutral, but he caught the slight tension that entered her posture. Will her return complicate our arrangement? I don't believe so. Sophia understood that my personal feelings couldn't supersede pack welfare. If she has issues with our alliance, we'll address them professionally. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. Not jealousy, but the kind of strategic assessment that suggested she was already calculating potential complications and preparing contingencies. 6 months, Marcus said suddenly. Give me 6 months of public courtship to prepare the pack for this kind of alliance. Let them see your capabilities, understand what you bring to Moonstone territory. By the time we marry, they'll accept you as an equal partner rather than fighting the concept. Evelyn considered this. Her head tilted slightly as she weighed the proposal. The pendant's light had dimmed to its normal metallic gleam, But Marcus was beginning to understand that its responses might be more significant than mere jewelry. 6 months of courtship, with the understanding that we're both evaluating this arrangement. If either of us decides we're incompatible, we walk away with no hard feelings and no political consequences. Agreed. Marcus extended his hand across the table. Partners? When Evelyn's fingers closed around his, Marcus felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with pack politics and everything to do with the woman sitting across from him. Her grip was firm, confident, and warm, and for a moment he found himself wondering what it would be like to touch her without the barrier of formal negotiations between them. Partners, she agreed, though something in her expression suggested she had felt that same unexpected spark. I should warn you, Marcus, I don't do anything halfway. If we're going to convince 3 packs that this alliance is legitimate, we'll need to sell the romance along with the politics. Marcus's wolf stirred with interest at the implications. I think I can manage that, Evelyn. The question is whether you're prepared for what courting an alpha actually involves. Her laugh was soft, but dangerous. Darling, I think you'll find I'm prepared for considerably more than you might expect. As he left the Blackthorn estate that afternoon, Marcus found himself looking forward to the next 6 months, with an anticipation that had nothing to do with preventing war, and everything to do with the enigmatic woman who had just agreed to let him try to win her. Behind him, Evelyn watched his departure from her office window, one hand unconsciously touching the silver pendant at her throat. The ancient metal was warm against her skin, responding to the significance of the agreement she had just made and the changes it would bring to both their territories. 6 months to determine if Marcus Stone was worthy of partnership. 6 months to discover if she could maintain her independence while building something that resembled love. The game, it seemed, was about to begin. Chapter 3. Proving Ground. 2 months into their arrangement, Evelyn stood in the main conference room of Moonstone Pack's headquarters, surrounded by maps, territorial surveys, and the skeptical faces of Marcus's senior pack members. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating the tension that seemed to follow her wherever she went within Packlands, while the silver pendant at her throat maintained a steady, warm pulse that had become her constant companion during these diplomatic missions. The proposed trade route through Silver Ridge territory would increase our revenue by 30%, she explained, her finger tracing the marked path on the detailed map spread across the oak table. But only if we can guarantee safe passage for their merchants through our lands and establish proper security protocols. Beta James Morrison, Marcus's second-in-command, frowned at the proposal with the kind of suspicion that had greeted every innovation she'd suggested. We've never needed Silver Ridge's approval for our trade agreements. Why should we start bowing to their demands now? Evelyn met his challenging stare with calm professionalism, feeling the pendant's warmth increase slightly as territorial tensions spiked around the table. Because isolationist policies are what created the current crisis with Crimson Falls. Building broader, mutually beneficial alliances strengthens everyone's position while reducing the likelihood of territorial conflicts. The discussion that followed was heated but productive, with Evelyn fielding questions and objections with the kind of diplomatic skill that gradually earned grudging respect from pack members who had initially dismissed her as an outsider. Marcus watched from his position at the head of the table, noting how naturally she commanded attention, without triggering the dominance conflicts that usually arose when multiple strong personalities occupied the same space. Miss Blackthorn raises valid points, said Elena Vasquez, the pack's head of security. Our current trade relationships are vulnerable to disruption if regional conflicts escalate. Diversifying partnerships could provide stability. Stability built on dependence, James countered. What happens when these new allies decide our terms are no longer favorable? Then we negotiate better terms from a position of strength rather than isolation, Evelyn replied smoothly. Strength that comes from options, not stubborn adherence to outdated policies. The subtle barb hit its target, and Marcus watched James's expression tighten with barely controlled irritation. But before the beta could respond, Evelyn continued with a strategic redirection that showcased her political acumen. Beta Morrison, your concerns about dependency are valid. Perhaps you could review the proposed security protocols and suggest modifications that would protect Moonstone's interests while satisfying Silver Ridge's requirements. The request was brilliant in its simplicity, acknowledging James's expertise while giving him ownership of the solution rather than forcing him to accept her ideas wholesale. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the way she navigated pack politics without triggering the ego conflicts that could derail negotiations entirely. Later that afternoon, as they walked the perimeter of Moonstone territory together, Marcus found himself studying Evelyn's profile as she examined the defensive positions his patrols maintained along the Crimson Falls border. The pendant at her throat caught the sunlight, and he noticed it seemed to pulse more rapidly when they approached areas where territorial boundaries were most contested. "Your pack is adapting to me faster than I expected," she observed, pausing to test the scent markers that define the territorial boundary. Her enhanced senses picked up nuances that most werewolves would miss. "Though James still looks like he's swallowed something unpleasant every time I speak." Marcus chuckled. "James has been my beta for 8 years. He's protective of pack traditions and suspicious of change. But he's also smart enough to recognize results when he sees them." "And what results am I producing exactly?" Evelyn's tone was casual, but Marcus caught the underlying seriousness of the question. 3 new alliance agreements, a 20% increase in Healing Center revenue, and the first real diplomatic progress with Silver Ridge in 5 years. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "You're not just meeting expectations, Evelyn. You're exceeding them in ways that are reshaping how other packs view Moonstone territory." Something flickered in her pale green eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at his acknowledgement. For a moment, the careful distance she maintained seemed to waver, revealing glimpses of the woman beneath the diplomat. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. "The pack elders want to meet with you formally. They're concerned about the political implications of our engagement, but they're also curious about your capabilities and the nature of your family's unique position." Evelyn's expression sharpened. "Concerned how?" "They question whether a marriage between equals can maintain pack stability. Traditional hierarchy exists for specific reasons, and they worry about precedent." Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "They want assurance that you understand your role would be supportive rather than competitive." The silence that followed was loaded with tension, and Marcus watched the pendant at her throat pulse with brighter light, as if responding to her emotional state or some unseen threat. "Marcus, I need you to understand something clearly," she said finally, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made his wolf pay attention. "I will not pretend to be less than I am to comfort traditionalists. If your elders expect me to demonstrate submission, they're going to be disappointed." "I know." The admission came out rougher than he intended. "And I've been thinking about that a lot lately." They had reached a rocky outcropping that provided a clear view of both territories. Moonstone's rolling hills dotted with pack buildings, and beyond the border markers, the darker forests of Crimson Falls, where enemy patrols tested their defenses with increasing frequency. The late afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and amber, beautiful and deceptively peaceful. "Tell me about the real pressure you're facing," Evelyn said quietly. "Not just from the elders, but from the pack leadership. I see how they watch you when they think I'm not looking." Marcus was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the vulnerability required to answer honestly. "They expect me to control my mate, to present a unified front where my authority is absolute and unquestioned. The idea of sharing decision-making authority challenges everything they believe about pack leadership and alpha dominance." "And what do you believe?" The question hit deeper than she might have realized. Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the strength in the line of her jaw. 2 months of working together had shown him capabilities he hadn't anticipated. Not just her diplomatic skills, but her strategic thinking, her ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the strongest partnerships are built on mutual respect rather than dominance. But I also know that belief puts me at odds with centuries of pack tradition and could undermine my authority if handled poorly." Evelyn moved closer, close enough that he could catch her scent. Something complex and intriguing that seemed to shift like shadows, carrying hints of ozone and electrical energy that made his wolf restless, in ways that had nothing to do with territorial disputes. "Then perhaps it's time for new traditions." The words hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. a recognition that went deeper than political alliance or physical attraction. This woman was offering him something he hadn't known he wanted. A partnership based on choice rather than obligation, strength rather than submission. "There's something else you should know," he said, decision crystallizing as he spoke. "Crimson Falls Alpha has been sending scouts across our border more frequently, not just testing defenses, gathering intelligence about you specifically." "Bye." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but he caught the subtle tension that entered her posture, and the pendant's pulsing quickened noticeably. "What kind of intelligence? Your routines, your security arrangements, your relationships within the pack. He's particularly interested in your healing center and the medical supplies you maintain there." Marcus stepped closer, his protective instincts stirring. "I think he's planning something more substantial than border harassment, and you're part of his target profile." Instead of the concern he expected, Evelyn's smile was sharp and dangerous, while the pendant flared with brief, unmistakable light. "Let him plan. He'll find I'm considerably more difficult to handle than he anticipates. This isn't a game, Evelyn. Crimson Falls doesn't play by diplomatic rules. Neither do I, when necessary." As she turned to face him fully, and for the first time since their negotiations began, Marcus caught a glimpse of something truly formidable beneath her composed exterior. "You've seen the politician and the diplomat, Marcus. You haven't seen what I'm capable of when someone threatens what's mine." The possessive note in her voice sent heat through his system, along with the unsettling realization that he wanted to be included in whatever she considered hers. 2 months of careful courtship had evolved into something more complex than either of them had anticipated. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Crimson Falls Alpha is about to learn why the Blackthorn bloodline has survived when others haven't. And you're going to learn why neutrality doesn't mean weakness." The pendant pulsed once more, as if emphasizing her words. "My family has protected these territories for 3 generations, not through submission, but through capabilities that most werewolves can't imagine." As they walked back toward pack headquarters, Marcus found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman beside him. The political alliance he had proposed was becoming something deeper and more dangerous, a partnership that could reshape both their territories or destroy them entirely. That evening, as he watched Evelyn navigate dinner conversation with his senior staff, fielding questions about trade negotiations with the same ease she had demonstrated in the conference room, Marcus realized he was no longer thinking about this arrangement in terms of necessity. He was beginning to want it for entirely different reasons. The revelation should have concerned him. Instead, as he caught Evelyn's eye across the table and saw her slight smile in response to his attention, Marcus found himself looking forward to discovering what the next 4 months would reveal about both of them. Outside the dining room windows, the forest that bordered Crimson Falls territory seemed darker than usual, as if shadows were gathering for purposes unknown. But inside, surrounded by the warm light of pack fellowship and the growing connection between him and the remarkable woman who had agreed to consider becoming his partner, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, tempered by the growing certainty that their arrangement was becoming something far more significant than political convenience. The pendant at Evelyn's throat caught the candlelight as she laughed at something Elena said, and Marcus wondered if its responses were as meaningful as they seemed, or if he was simply becoming attuned to the subtle indicators of power that surrounded the most intriguing woman he'd ever encountered. Chapter 4. Dangerous Attraction Month 3 brought unseasonably warm weather to the territory borders, and with it, the kind of restless energy that made both humans and wolves edgy. Marcus found himself spending more time than strictly necessary at the Blackthorn estate, ostensibly to coordinate security measures as Crimson Falls's scouting activities intensified, but privately acknowledging that Evelyn's company had become the highlight of his increasingly complicated days. "The patrol reports are troubling," Evelyn said, spreading the latest intelligence across her office desk. Her dark hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and Marcus found himself momentarily distracted by the elegant line of her neck as she bent over the documents. The silver pendant at her throat pulsed with a steady rhythm that had become as familiar as her voice. Crimson Falls scouts aren't just gathering information anymore. They're testing response times, mapping our defensive positions, and probing for weaknesses in our coordination protocols. Marcus forced himself to focus on the tactical situation, rather than the way her fingers moved across the papers with practiced efficiency. though guilt twisted in his stomach as he remembered another woman's hands, another moment of weakness that he'd been trying to forget for months. My beta thinks they're planning a probing attack, something designed to test our alliance without triggering full-scale war, he said, pushing away thoughts of Sophia and the complicated night they'd shared just before she'd left for training. James is probably right. Evelyn looked up, and their eyes met across the desk. The moment stretched longer than professional consultation required, charged with the tension that had been building between them for weeks, tension that made Marcus's guilt over his past indiscretion feel like a physical weight. But I don't think you're their primary target. Meaning they want to see how you react when I'm threatened. Whether you'll compromise pack safety to protect me, whether our alliance is strong enough to withstand pressure. She stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. It's actually quite clever. Attack the relationship rather than the territory directly. Marcus rose and joined her at the window, standing close enough to catch the subtle scent that seemed uniquely hers. Something complex and intriguing that made his wolf restless, in ways that had nothing to do with territorial disputes, and everything to do with the growing attraction he felt despite his complicated past. The pendant's glow seemed brighter when he was near, though he wasn't sure if that was his imagination or something more significant. They're underestimating you, he observed, trying to focus on tactical concerns rather than the way being near her made him feel simultaneously protective and guilty. Everyone underestimates me. It's one of my greatest advantages. Evelyn's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. The question is whether you're beginning to underestimate them. Before Marcus could respond, an explosion of sound erupted from the forest beyond the estate grounds, the distinctive howl of wolves in distress, followed by the sharper crack of gunfire. Both he and Evelyn were moving before the echoes faded, years of alpha training overriding conscious thought and personal complications. Silver Ridge Patrol, Evelyn said, already reaching for the emergency communication device on her desk. The pendant at her throat flared with sudden, brilliant light. They use that route twice weekly. If Crimson Falls is attacking them on neutral territory, it's an act of war. Marcus was already shifting into alpha mode, his presence expanding to fill the room with commanding energy. My pack can be here in 15 minutes. No. Evelyn's voice cut through his planning with absolute authority, while the pendant's light intensified further. This is my territory. My responsibility. She was moving toward the door, but Marcus caught her arm, feeling the warm strength of her beneath the silk of her blouse. The contact sent electricity through him that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the woman who had been occupying his thoughts despite his determination to maintain professional distance. Evelyn, you can't handle an armed assault alone. The look she gave him was dangerous, filled with something primitive and fierce that made his wolf respond with interest rather than dominance. The pendant was now glowing bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. Watch me. What followed challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about pack politics and personal capability. Evelyn moved through the emergency response with the kind of fluid efficiency that spoke of extensive training and natural leadership ability. She coordinated with Silver Ridge's emergency frequencies, deployed her own security teams with military precision, and established a command center in her office that would have impressed seasoned strategists. Crimson Falls has 15 fighters in the engagement zone, she reported, monitoring multiple communication channels simultaneously while the pendant provided steady illumination. Silver Ridge Patrol is pinned down but not critically wounded. They're using this as a test of our response protocols and alliance strength. Marcus found himself taking orders rather than giving them. And the strangest part was how natural it felt. Evelyn's tactical thinking was several steps ahead of his own, and her intelligence network provided real-time information that his pack's resources couldn't match. Working with her like this only intensified the attraction he'd been fighting, and the guilt over the secret he was keeping. Your people need to stay back, she continued, already suiting up in tactical gear that appeared to be custom-made for her specific requirements. This needs to look like neutral territory defending itself, not Moonstone Pack acting aggressively. You're not going out there alone. I'm not. Her smile was fierce and beautiful, making his chest tight with feelings he couldn't afford to examine too closely. You're coming with me, but Marcus, in the field you follow my lead. This is my territory, my rules. The revelation that followed redefined Marcus's understanding of his intended mate. Evelyn moved through the forest like she was born to it, her enhanced senses tracking enemies with precision that rivaled his own alpha abilities. But more than that, she fought with a skill and ruthlessness that spoke of extensive combat training and something deeper, an instinctive connection to the territory itself that seemed to enhance her natural capabilities. When they reached the engagement zone, Marcus watched in fascination as Evelyn took control of the tactical situation. Silver Ridge Patrol members were indeed pinned down behind a rocky outcropping, while Crimson Falls fighters used superior positioning to maintain pressure without pushing for a decisive victory. "They want us to escalate," Evelyn murmured, her voice barely audible even to his enhanced hearing. The pendant beneath her tactical vest cast enough light to illuminate her determined expression. "Force us into aggressive action that justifies broader conflict. So what do we do?" Her answer was to demonstrate capabilities that left Marcus questioning everything he thought he knew about neutral territory leaders. Evelyn moved through the engagement zone like a ghost, using terrain and tactical positioning to neutralize enemy fighters without triggering the kind of dramatic confrontation Crimson Falls obviously wanted. The pendant's light seemed to pulse in rhythm with her movements, as if providing some form of guidance or enhancement. Marcus found himself providing support rather than leading the assault, and the experience was both humbling and exhilarating. Working alongside someone of equal capability, watching her handle threats with the same competence he brought to pack leadership, created a partnership dynamic he had never experienced. The guilt over his past with Sophia seemed insignificant compared to what he was building with Evelyn, which only made his deception feel worse. "Behind you," he warned, as a Crimson Falls fighter attempted to flank her position. Evelyn's response was fluid and devastating, disarming her attacker with movements that spoke of years of serious training, while the pendant flared with protective light. "Thanks. Cover the eastern approach while I coordinate extraction." By the time the engagement ended, Silver Ridge Patrol was safely extracted. Crimson Falls fighters had withdrawn with several casualties, and no tactical gains. And Marcus was looking at Evelyn with entirely new eyes. The pendant had dimmed to its normal metallic gleam, but the memory of its brilliant illumination during combat raised questions about the true extent of her capabilities. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked, as they walked back through the forest toward her estate. "Same place I learned everything else." Necessity. Her breathing was slightly elevated from exertion, and there was a flush in her cheeks that made her look both dangerous and beautiful. Neutral territory survives by being stronger than anyone expects. Marcus caught her arm, turning her to face him in the dappled light filtering through the forest canopy. "Evelyn, that pendant. During the fight, it was glowing bright enough to see from across the battlefield. Something flickered in her pale green eyes. Not surprise, but the kind of assessment that suggested she was deciding how much truth to reveal. The Blackthorn bloodline carries certain advantages. Territorial magic that's been passed down through generations. Magic. The word felt strange in his mouth, but it explained so much about what he had witnessed. "Is that why you're immune to alpha commands?" "Partially. It's also why I can hold neutral territory when others have failed. Why my intelligence network is so comprehensive, and why Crimson Falls is so interested in eliminating me." She touched the pendant briefly. "This isn't just jewelry, Marcus. It's a conduit for power that my family has guarded for centuries." The revelation should have been shocking, but instead, Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Her uncanny ability to read situations, her immunity to supernatural influence, her success in maintaining independence. All of it made sense when viewed through the lens of inherited magical ability. Standing there in the forest, watching her explain powers that went beyond anything he'd imagined, Marcus felt the full weight of his deception crash over him. This remarkable woman was offering him partnership based on honesty and respect, while he was hiding a secret that could destroy everything they were building. "Evelyn, there's something I need to tell you," he began, but she was already stepping closer. "What?" Instead of confessing, Marcus found himself lost in her pale green eyes, in the way the afternoon light caught the silver in her hair, in the scent that was uniquely hers. The guilt warred with desire, duty battled with want, and in that moment of weakness, he chose desire over honesty. "You're magnificent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The kiss that followed was inevitable, charged with months of growing attraction and the shared intensity of combat. Evelyn's response was immediate and fierce, her hands fisting in his tactical vest as she pulled him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the pendant was pulsing with soft, warm light. "This complicates things," she said. But she didn't step away. "Everything about us complicates things." Marcus's hands were still framing her face, thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones, even as guilt aided him for not being honest with her. "The question is whether the complications are worth it." Evelyn's smile was soft and dangerous. "Ask me again in 2 months." As they walked back to the estate, hands linked and tactical gear forgotten, Marcus realized that somewhere in the midst of political negotiations and combat partnerships, he had stopped thinking about marriage as a necessity and started wanting it as a choice. The knowledge that Evelyn possessed literal magical abilities only made her more intriguing, more worthy of the partnership he was beginning to crave. But beneath the growing love and respect, guilt gnawed at him. In 2 months, Sophia would return from her training, and the secret he was keeping would either remain buried or destroy everything beautiful he was building with the most remarkable woman he'd ever met. The thought of losing Evelyn made his chest tight with panic, but the thought of her discovering his deception through someone else was even worse. Yet every time he tried to find the courage to confess, her trust and growing affection made the words die in his throat. Behind them, the forest that bordered Crimson Falls territory seemed darker than before, as if shadows were gathering for purposes yet unknown. But ahead, the Blackthorn estate rose against the evening sky like a promise of sanctuary and possibility, its windows beginning to glow with warm light as evening approached. Marcus allowed himself to believe their relationship might survive whatever storms lay ahead. The alternative, losing the woman who was transforming him into someone better, was too devastating to contemplate. The pendant at her throat pulsed once more, as if sensing the conflict within him, and Marcus wondered if her family's magic was beginning to detect the deception he carried, or if his guilt was simply making him paranoid. Either way, time was running out to make things right, and with each passing day, the stakes of his honesty grew higher, while his courage to speak the truth grew smaller. 2 months to confess his mistake, or risk losing everything when Sophia returned with whatever consequences their brief encounter had created. The future had never felt more uncertain. Chapter 5. Shadows and Secrets. Month 5 arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made werewolves restless, and Marcus found himself standing in his private office, staring at intelligence reports that made his wolf pace anxiously beneath his skin. The wedding preparations were moving forward smoothly. Too smoothly, perhaps. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the approaching ceremony. The guilt he'd been carrying for 2 months was eating him alive. Marcus set down the patrol report he'd been pretending to read and rubbed his temples, trying to ease the tension that had been building since that night with Sophia 3 months ago. 3 months since the moment of weakness that could destroy everything he was building with Evelyn. 3 months of living with a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Evelyn entered with the fluid grace that had become familiar over their months of partnership, but Marcus immediately noticed the tension in her posture. Her pale green eyes held the kind of sharpness that appeared when her enhanced senses detected something amiss, and the silver pendant at her throat was pulsing with a rhythm faster than its usual steady glow. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "About what?" "About the fact that you've been carrying guilt like a physical weight for months. About the way your scent changes whenever someone mentions Sophia's return. About the secret you've been keeping that's slowly poisoning what we're building together." Evelyn moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass as she gazed out at the packed grounds. The pendant's light had intensified, responding to the emotional tension in the room. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Evelyn, Marcus." She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes made his wolf respond with guilty submission rather than alpha authority. "I've known something was wrong for weeks. My enhanced senses pick up emotional distress, remember? The question is whether you're going to be honest with me, or if I'm going to have to piece together the truth from fragments and implications." The direct confrontation was both his worst fear and a relief. Months of deception had been slowly corroding his ability to be the partner Evelyn deserved, and the weight of carrying secrets, while building a relationship based on trust, had become unbearable. 3 months ago, he began, his voice rough with shame. The night before Sophia left for training, the pressure of the alliance negotiations, the weight of potentially leading my pack into war. Everything felt overwhelming. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but he caught the way her hand stilled against the window frame. The pendant's pulsing had quickened, responding to the significance of what he was revealing. We had been working late on defensive strategies. Sophia offered to stay, help me finish the reports. One thing led to another, and Marcus forced himself to meet her eyes. I slept with her. Once. It was weakness, not love, not even real attraction. Just a moment when leadership felt too heavy and she offered comfort I shouldn't have accepted. The silence that followed was loaded with 3 months of deception, trust given and betrayed, and the sound of a partnership cracking under the weight of dishonesty. 3 months ago, Evelyn repeated quietly, which means if she conceived that night, she'd be about 3 months pregnant now. Marcus felt the admission like a physical blow. Yes. Evelyn moved to stand behind her desk, her movements careful and controlled in the way that suggested she was restraining something dangerous. The pendant was now pulsing with warning light, and Marcus could smell the ozone that preceded her magical abilities manifesting. Let me make sure I understand, she said, her voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that made even alpha wolves nervous. You slept with your beta female 3 months ago. She left immediately afterward for training that would keep her away until just before our wedding, and you've spent our entire courtship lying to me about it. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you. Deception by omission is still deception, Marcus. The pendant flared with sudden brightness, especially when that deception involves something that could produce an heir who would supersede our alliance under pack law. The legal implications crashed over him with devastating clarity. Pack law was absolute about alpha responsibilities to biological children. If Sophia was pregnant with his child, their wedding would be seen as abandonment of duty rather than political alliance. The pack elders who had been skeptical of their arrangement would have legal grounds to demand he honor his obligations to his pregnant beta rather than marry an outsider. Evelyn, even if she is pregnant, that doesn't change what I feel for you, what we've built together. Doesn't it? She moved closer, and for the first time since their negotiations began, Marcus caught something truly dangerous beneath her composed exterior. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been building our relationship on a foundation of lies while potentially creating obligations that would make our marriage impossible. I chose you. I'm choosing you now. You're choosing me after lying to me for months about something that could destroy our alliance. That's not choice, Marcus. That's damage control. The pendant was now bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. Did you use protection? The clinical nature of the question was somehow more devastating than screaming would have been. Yes, but nothing is completely reliable. No, it's not. Evelyn's voice carried the kind of finality that made his chest tight with panic. Which means Sophia could return carrying your child, with legal and cultural claims that supersede everything we've negotiated. Marcus felt the future he wanted slipping away, destroyed by a moment of weakness and months of cowardice. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand that trust, once broken, can't be easily repaired. I want you to realize that partnership requires honesty, especially about things that could affect both our futures. She moved to the door, effectively ending the conversation. And Marcus, I want you to figure out what you actually want, because if Sophia is pregnant, you're going to have to choose between duty to a child you may have created and the woman you claim to love. After she left, Marcus remained in his office as afternoon shadows lengthened across the pack grounds. Through his window, he could see pack members going about their daily routines, unaware that their alpha's personal failures might soon destabilize everything they had worked to build. The confrontation he had dreaded for months was finally over, but instead of relief, Marcus felt the hollow certainty that he had damaged something precious beyond repair. Evelyn's trust had been the foundation of their partnership, and his deception had cracked that foundation in ways that might prove irreparable. 2 weeks later, the call came. Alpha Stone? This is Dr. Martinez from the Northern Territories Medical Center. I'm calling about Sophia Clare. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. What about her? She's listed you as the emergency contact for her pregnancy. She's experienced some complications and has been asking to speak with you directly. The words hit like physical blows. Pregnancy, complications, emergency contact. Are they both all right? Stable now, but she's requested that you be informed about her condition. She's approximately 6 months along, which according to her records would put conception around. Marcus could hear papers rustling. Early summer. She's been quite insistent that you needed to know immediately. 6 months. The timeline was perfect for their encounter 3 months before she left. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the last of his hopes for a simple resolution crumble into dust. Thank you for calling, Doctor. I'll arrange to speak with her as soon as possible. That evening, Marcus stood on his office balcony, staring out at the forest that bordered Evelyn's neutral territory. Somewhere beyond those trees, she was probably planning contingencies for exactly this situation, her strategic mind already adapting to changed circumstances, while his own thoughts remained trapped in circles of guilt and regret. The wedding was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to face the fact that his moment of weakness had created a child who would take precedence over every political alliance, every personal desire, every dream of partnership he had built with the most remarkable woman he'd ever met. Paclaw was clear. The child came first. Always. As he prepared to call Evelyn and tell her that their worst fears had been confirmed, Marcus understood that some mistakes created consequences that no amount of love or regret could overcome. He had wanted everything: duty satisfied and love fulfilled. Instead, his deception and weakness had ensured he would lose the only thing that truly mattered. The autumn wind carried the scent of change and endings, and Marcus finally understood that honor sometimes required sacrificing your heart for obligations you couldn't escape. 3 weeks to prepare for the hardest conversation of his life. 3 weeks to say goodbye to the woman who had shown him what he could become, destroyed by what he had been too weak to resist. In the distance, the Blackthorn estate glowed with warm light against the darkening sky, and Marcus wondered if this would be the last time he would see it as anything other than a reminder of what he had lost through his own failures. Some choices created consequences that lasted a lifetime. His moment with Sophia was about to become exactly that kind of choice. The future he had wanted was over, before it had truly begun. Chapter 6. Wedding Day. Reckoning. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of crystalline autumn light that made everything appear diamond-sharp and impossibly vivid. 500 guests from across 3 packed territories had gathered on the Blackthorn estate grounds, transforming Evelyn's carefully maintained neutral territory into a political showcase that would reshape werewolf alliances for generations. Marcus stood before the ornate mirror in the estate's guest quarters, adjusting his midnight blue formal wear with hands that trembled despite his efforts to maintain composure. The ceremony preparations had consumed 3 weeks of careful orchestration, but beneath the diplomatic pageantry lay a truth that made his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. Sophia was 6 months pregnant with his child. The phone call from Dr. Martinez had confirmed his worst fears. The timeline matched perfectly with their encounter, and Sophia had been quite explicit about his paternity when she'd listed him as the emergency contact. 3 weeks of sleepless nights had followed, as Marcus wrestled with Paclaw, personal desires, and the devastating knowledge that he was about to break the heart of the only woman he'd ever truly loved. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. 5 minutes, Alpha Stone, came the coordinator's voice through the heavy oak door. Marcus took a final look at himself. Alpha of Moonstone Pack, soon-to-be father, and coward, who was about to commit the ultimate betrayal by going through with a ceremony he knew was doomed. He had tried to find the courage to call off the wedding, to spare Evelyn the public humiliation of what was about to happen. But cowardice had won. He couldn't face telling her privately that their dream was over, so he was allowing it to die publicly instead. The ceremony space was breathtaking. White silk pavilions and cascading flowers created an elegant backdrop against the estate's natural beauty, while carefully arranged seating ensured that territorial politics didn't create diplomatic incidents. Representatives from Silver Ridge, Crimson Falls, and a dozen smaller packs filled the chairs, their presence transforming what should have been a personal celebration into a supernatural summit that would witness his ultimate failure. When Marcus reached the altar and saw Evelyn walking toward him, the guilt nearly drove him to his knees. She was magnificent. The wedding dress was an architectural masterpiece, ivory silk that flowed like liquid moonlight, designed to accommodate the possibility of sudden transformation without sacrificing elegance. Her dark hair was styled in an elaborate arrangement that showcased the silver jewelry of her bloodline, and the pendant at her throat pulsed with steady, warm light that seemed to cast a protective aura around her. As she approached, Marcus felt his chest tighten with the knowledge that this was the last time she would look at him with love and trust. In minutes, that expression would transform into something he couldn't bear to imagine: betrayal, hurt, and the kind of devastation that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The officiant began the ancient ceremony, words that had bound werewolf couples for centuries, flowing over the assembled guests like ritual magic. Marcus spoke his vows mechanically, each promise feeling like another knife in his chest, because he knew they were lies built on deception. Do you, Marcus Stone, Alpha of Moonstone Pack, take Evelyn Blackthorne as your equal partner, your chosen mate, your— Stop! The voice cut through the ceremony like a blade, causing 500 heads to turn toward the pavilion entrance. Sophia Clare stood framed in the opening, unmistakably pregnant, beneath a flowing dress that emphasized, rather than concealed, her condition. Her brown hair caught the morning light as she moved down the aisle with deliberate, theatrical precision, one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "This is a mockery," she declared, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Marcus Stone cannot marry another when he's already bound by blood and duty to me and the child I carry." The explosion of whispers and shocked exclamations that followed was exactly what Marcus had feared for weeks. Pack representatives leaned forward in their chairs, scenting political opportunity in the chaos, while camera flashes from the official photographers captured every moment for posterity. Marcus felt his world collapse in real time, but the worst part was the look of growing understanding that crossed Evelyn's face. She wasn't surprised. She was watching the confirmation of suspicions that had been eating at her for weeks. "I carry the Alpha's child," Sophia announced, her voice ringing with conviction and triumph. "We were lovers 3 months before I left for training, bound by passion, and now by the innocent life that grows within me. This political marriage cannot supersede the sacred duty he owes to his heir." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could feel the weight of 500 pairs of eyes, the political implications crashing over him like a tsunami. But all he could focus on was Evelyn's pale green eyes as realization and betrayal warred across her features. "Is this true, Marcus?" Her voice was barely audible, but it carried across the silent pavilion with perfect clarity. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you haven't been with her." This was the moment that would define everything. Marcus could feel pack law pressing down on him like a physical weight. His obligations to his unborn child, the expectations of his elders, centuries of tradition that demanded he acknowledge Sophia's claim. But more than that, he could see the trust dying in Evelyn's eyes, killed by his months of deception and cowardice. His silence stretched long enough to become an answer in itself. "Your silence is answer enough," Evelyn said quietly, her voice carrying a finality that cut deeper than screaming would have. What happened next redefined Marcus's understanding of the woman he had been about to marry. Instead of breaking down, instead of fleeing in humiliation, Evelyn straightened to her full height and addressed the assembled guests with the kind of alpha presence that made everyone instinctively pay attention, while the pendant at her throat flared with brilliant protective light. "Ladies and gentlemen, honored representatives of our supernatural communities," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned gathering. "It appears this ceremony has revealed truths that make our alliance impossible to continue." She turned to face Marcus directly, and the look in her eyes was sharp as winter starlight. "I, Evelyn Blackthorne, reject you, Marcus Stone, as my mate and partner. This alliance is dissolved, effective immediately." The formal rejection sent ripples of shock through the crowd. Werewolf marriages could be dissolved, but public rejections at the altar were virtually unprecedented, especially between alphas of such significant territories. But before anyone could fully process the implications, chaos erupted from an entirely different direction. Crimson Falls Alpha burst through the tree line with 50 armed wolves, their attack cry splitting the morning air as they charged toward the ceremony grounds. The wedding had provided perfect cover for an assault. All 3 pack leaderships gathered in one location, distracted by personal drama, their guard formations scattered for diplomatic rather than defensive purposes. "Protect the guests!" Evelyn's command cut through the confusion as enemy wolves flooded the ceremony space, her voice carrying the kind of supernatural authority that made every werewolf present respond instinctively to her leadership. What followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Evelyn's transformation was instantaneous and breathtaking, the wedding dress falling away as she shifted into an enormous silver-black wolf, marked with mystical symbols that pulsed with their own ethereal light. Her wolf form was larger than any female he'd ever seen, radiating the kind of alpha dominance that made other wolves instinctively submit. Ancient blackthorn magic flowed through her enhanced abilities, and as she moved through the battlefield, the very ground seemed to respond to her presence. Energy crackled around her like visible lightning, and when she howled, the sound carried supernatural resonance that paralyzed attacking wolves in their tracks. Marcus shifted to join the battle, his brown wolf working to coordinate the defense, but he quickly realized that Evelyn wasn't just defending. She was systematically dismantling Crimson Fall's entire assault strategy with tactical precision that seemed to anticipate their every move. She fought not like someone seeking his protection, but like a force of nature, defending what was hers. The battle reached its climax when Crimson Falls Alpha himself charged directly at Evelyn, his massive black wolf easily twice the size of most females. Marcus's instinct was to intercede, to protect her from an opponent that outweighed her significantly, but what followed shattered his understanding of her capabilities entirely. Evelyn met the enemy Alpha's attack with power that transcended normal werewolf abilities. The fight that followed was brief and decisive, ancient magic flowing through her enhanced strength until she stood over her defeated opponent, victorious and magnificent. When she shifted back to human form, someone quickly draped a cloak around her shoulders. Blood marked her hands and face, but she stood triumphant among the scattered remains of the enemy assault, the pendant at her throat blazing with light that seemed to illuminate the entire pavilion. "Let this serve as a lesson," she addressed the assembled crowd, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Anyone who mistakes neutral territory for weakness will face the consequences of their ignorance." As emergency teams tended to the wounded, and guests began to process what they had witnessed, Marcus found himself alone with Evelyn in the ruins of their wedding ceremony. Sophia had fled during the chaos, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices, without the distraction of her dramatics. "Evelyn, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Don't." Her pale green eyes were calm, but final, and the pendant had dimmed to its normal warm glow. "You made your choice months ago when you decided deception was easier than honesty. You made it again when you let me plan a wedding knowing it was built on lies. And you made it a final time when you stood silent and let me discover the truth through public humiliation. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did hurt me, repeatedly. Through months of lies, through cowardice, through allowing me to believe we were building something real when you knew it was doomed." Her voice remained steady, but Marcus caught the pain underneath. "The tragedy isn't that Sophia is pregnant, Marcus. It's that you never trusted me enough to be honest about it. I was afraid of losing you, so instead you ensured I would lose you." Evelyn turned toward the estate, effectively dismissing him. "Honor your obligations, Marcus. Be the father that child deserves. But understand that we are finished, not because of biology or pack law, but because partnership requires trust. And you proved you're incapable of giving me that." As she walked away without looking back, Marcus understood that he had lost something irreplaceable. Not just a political alliance or a strategic partnership, but the only woman who had ever seen his potential and chosen to help him become worthy of it. The scattered flowers and overturned chairs bore witness to more than a failed wedding. They marked the death of dreams built on deception, the price of cowardice, and the moment when Marcus finally learned that some betrayals could never be forgiven. Sophia's pregnancy had given him legal obligations he couldn't escape, but his dishonesty had cost him the only future that would have made those obligations bearable. In the distance, the Blackthorn estate stood proud against the afternoon sky, its neutrality preserved by the strength of a woman who needed no one's protection to forge her own destiny. Marcus had wanted everything: love without honesty, partnership without trust, a future built on the foundation of past mistakes. Instead, his cowardice had given him nothing but duty to a woman who had betrayed their enemies and responsibility to a child conceived in weakness. The autumn wind carried the scent of endings, and Marcus finally understood that some choices created consequences that lasted a lifetime. He had chosen deception over truth and lost every. Chapter 7. Paths diverged. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Marcus stood in his office staring at reports that painted a picture of his own diminishing relevance. The autumn had given way to harsh winter, and with it came the bitter reality of consequences that extended far beyond personal heartbreak. Moonstone packs standing among supernatural communities had plummeted following the public debacle of his failed wedding. Other alphas whispered about his inability to honor commitments, his failure to control his own people, and most damaging of all, his cowardice in allowing personal obligations to undermine diplomatic necessity. Trade agreements had been canceled, territorial negotiations stalled, and several smaller packs had withdrawn their allegiance entirely. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to have everything, he had lost what mattered most. Sophia had given birth to a healthy daughter 3 months ago, a beautiful child with his dark hair and her brown eyes who deserved better than the circumstances of her conception. Marcus had done his duty, acknowledging paternity and providing support. But the relationship with Sophia remained coldly functional. She had gotten what she wanted: security and status as the mother of an alpha's heir. But there was no love between them, only obligation and shared responsibility for their daughter's welfare. A knock at his office door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Beta James Morrison entered with the careful expression he'd worn since the wedding disaster, carrying intelligence reports that Marcus suspected would contain more evidence of their deteriorating position. "Border Patrol encountered Blackthorn security this morning," James said without preamble. "They're expanding their eastern trade route. Miss Blackthorn has negotiated agreements with 5 new territories in the past month." Marcus looked up from the scattered papers on his desk. The mention of Evelyn's name still caused a sharp pain in his chest, like pressing on a wound that refused to heal. Her business is thriving, then. More than thriving. She's revolutionizing supernatural commerce. The neutrality model is being adopted by territories across the continent. James hesitated before continuing. "There's something else." Alexander King arrived at the Blackthorn estate yesterday. The name hit Marcus's memory immediately. Alexander King, Alpha of the Northern Reach Pack, a territory known for progressive leadership and innovative approaches to supernatural politics. Powerful, respected, and exactly the kind of leader who would recognize Evelyn's capabilities and court her properly. Marcus felt something twist in his chest that might have been jealousy mixed with a recognition that Alexander King was probably everything he should have been: honorable, straightforward, worthy of the remarkable woman he had lost through his own failures. "Official diplomatic visit?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Intelligence suggests it's more than political consultation. King has been corresponding with Miss Blackthorn for months, and this meeting appears to be finalizing some kind of alliance agreement." James's voice carried careful neutrality. "Marcus, there are rumors that he's courting her. Seriously courting her, with the kind of honesty and respect she deserves." The pain in his chest intensified. 6 months of watching Evelyn thrive while his own territory struggled had taught him exactly how much he had lost. The woman who could have transformed Moonstone Pack into something unprecedented was building her success elsewhere, with someone who had never betrayed her trust. "Good for him," Marcus said, meaning it despite the ache. "She deserves someone who won't lie to her." "Is that really how you want this to end?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to confront. James had been his beta for 8 years, had watched him build Moonstone Pack's reputation through careful leadership and strategic thinking. He had also witnessed the transformation that 5 months of partnership with Evelyn had created, a version of Marcus that had been more confident, more innovative, more genuinely happy than he had been in years. "What would you have me do, James? Storm the Blackthorn estate and declare my regrets? Disrupt her chance at happiness with someone who actually deserves her?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. I made my choice when I lied to her for months. She made hers when she walked away. Your choice was made out of fear and weakness. Hers was made out of self-respect and strength. James moved to stand beside him at the window. But that doesn't mean you can't learn from your mistakes. Learning from mistakes doesn't undo their consequences. No, but it can prevent you from repeating them. That afternoon, Marcus found himself driving toward the Blackthorn estate for the first time since the wedding disaster. The winter landscape was harsh and beautiful, stripped of autumn's gentler colors, but possessed of a stark elegance that reminded him of Evelyn herself, uncompromising, magnificent, and utterly self-sufficient. The estate looked different somehow, more prosperous, more vibrant, with new construction that spoke of expansion and success. There was an energy about the place that suggested new possibilities, fresh starts, the kind of forward momentum that came with leaving painful past behind. Maya, Evelyn's assistant, met him at the main entrance with the polite professionalism that didn't quite conceal her surprise at his presence. Alpha Stone. Miss Blackthorn is in meetings with Alpha King, but I can arrange an appointment if you'd like to wait. Actually, I was hoping to speak with both of them, if that's possible. Maya's eyebrows rose fractionally, but her expression remained diplomatically neutral. I'll inquire about their availability. The wait gave Marcus time to reconsider what he was about to do. Coming here wasn't about winning Evelyn back. 6 months of consequences had taught him that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. This was about something else entirely. Closure, honesty, and the kind of conversation he should have had months ago. When Maya returned, she led him to the main conference room where Evelyn and Alexander King were reviewing what appeared to be territorial agreements and alliance documents. The sight of them working together with obvious mutual respect and compatibility was exactly what Marcus had expected, and exactly what he deserved to witness. Alexander King was everything Marcus had imagined. Tall, commanding, with the kind of natural authority that made other alphas take notice. But more than that, he looked at Evelyn with the kind of genuine admiration and respect that Marcus had felt, but failed to demonstrate when it mattered most. Marcus. Evelyn's voice was professionally cordial, giving nothing away about her feelings regarding his unexpected appearance. The silver pendant at her throat pulsed with its familiar warm light, but her expression remained carefully neutral. What brings you to neutral territory? I wanted to apologize, he said simply. To both of you. Alexander's expression sharpened with interest, while Evelyn's remained carefully guarded. But Marcus caught the slight tension that entered her posture, the way her hands stilled on the documents spread across the conference table. Apologize for what, specifically? She asked. For being a coward, for choosing deception over honesty, for failing to be worthy of what you offered me. Marcus met her pale green eyes directly, seeing his own regret reflected in their depths, and for waiting 6 months to say what I should have said the morning after I learned about Sophia's pregnancy, which is, Marcus took a breath, aware that Alexander was listening to every word, that this conversation would define not just his relationship with Evelyn, but his own understanding of what kind of man he actually was. That I was wrong. That lying to you was the worst mistake of my life. That losing you taught me the difference between wanting something and deserving it. He paused, gathering courage for the hardest part, and that I hope you find with Alexander everything I was too weak to give you. The silence that followed was loaded with 6 months of pain, growth, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that came from facing the consequences of your choices. Marcus, Evelyn said quietly, I appreciate the apology, but you can't undo the past by acknowledging your mistakes. I know. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or second chances. I'm here to make sure you understand that what happened wasn't about you not being worthy of honesty. It was about me not being brave enough to give you what you deserved. Alexander had been listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested he understood exactly what kind of conversation he was witnessing. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. Evelyn, he said, I think you and Alpha Stone need to finish this conversation privately. I'll be in the library when you're ready to continue our discussions. After he left, Marcus and Evelyn were alone for the first time since the wedding disaster. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they hadn't said and all the ways they had failed each other. "Thank you for saying that," Evelyn said finally. "It does matter, more than you know." "Yeah, does it change anything?" Her smile was sad and beautiful. "It changes everything and nothing, Marcus. I needed to hear that the problem was your weakness, not my worth, but I can't build a future on apologies for past betrayals." Marcus nodded, understanding that this was closure rather than reconciliation. "Alexander seems like a good man." "He is. He's been honest with me from the beginning, transparent about his intentions, respectful of my independence." Her meaning was clear, everything Marcus should have been but wasn't. "He sees me as an equal partner, not a political necessity he needs to manage. Then I hope you'll be very happy together. We're still negotiating the terms of our alliance, but yes, I think we will be." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "What about you? How are you managing fatherhood and pack leadership? Learning that duty without love is a cold comfort. That my daughter deserves a father who chose her existence, not one who was trapped by circumstances." Marcus's honesty surprised even him. "I'm trying to be better for her than I was for you. That's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes and try not to repeat them." As he prepared to leave the Blackthorn estate for what might be the final time, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that he had finally found his courage 6 months too late. Behind him, Evelyn was building a new future with a man who deserved her from the beginning, while he returned to a territory diminished by his own poor choices. But for the first time since the wedding disaster, Marcus felt something approaching peace. He had finally spoken the truth, acknowledged his failures, and given Evelyn the closure she needed to move forward without the burden of his mistakes. Sometimes, he realized, love meant letting go gracefully, rather than fighting selfishly for second chances you hadn't earned. Sometimes it meant accepting that the best thing you could do for someone was stay out of their way while they built the happiness you had been too weak to provide. The winter wind carried the scent of snow and new possibilities, and Marcus drove back to his territory, understanding that redemption sometimes looked like accepting the consequences of your choices, with dignity, rather than demanding forgiveness you hadn't earned. Evelyn deserved better than his belated declarations of regret. She deserved the future she was building with someone who had been worthy of her from the start. In his rearview mirror, the Blackthorn estate grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last remnants of a dream he had destroyed through his own cowardice. Ahead lay the long road home to a territory that would never be what it could have been, and a life built on duty rather than choice. But also ahead lay his daughter, who deserved a father who had learned from his mistakes, and a pack that needed a leader who understood that honor sometimes required sacrifice. Marcus had wanted everything and lost what mattered most. Now he would spend the rest of his life ensuring that his failures taught him how to be better. Not for himself, but for those who depended on him. The future he had wanted was gone forever. The future he deserved was just beginning to take shape, built on hard-won wisdom, and the kind of truth that came from finally understanding the cost of deception. It would have to be enough. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 2 years after the wedding that never was, Evelyn stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly expanded Blackthorn estate, watching the morning sun cast golden light across territories that had flourished beyond her wildest expectations. The silver pendant at her throat pulsed with its familiar warm rhythm, but now it carried an additional weight of contentment that came from building something lasting with someone who had proven worthy of her trust. Alexander entered the office with the confident stride that had first caught her attention during those difficult months after Marcus's betrayal. His presence still made her wolf respond with interest and appreciation, but now it was layered with the deep satisfaction of a partnership that had grown stronger with each challenge they'd faced together. "The Australian mediation was successful," he announced, setting down the communication device that had kept them connected to the Pacific territories throughout the night. "Both Alpha factions have agreed to the power-sharing arrangement. They're implementing our model starting next month." Evelyn turned from the window, unable to suppress the smile that crossed her features. "That makes 58 territories now. At this rate, traditional hierarchies will be the exception rather than the rule within a decade." Speaking of which, Alexander moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could catch his scent. something clean and masculine that her enhanced senses had learned to associate with safety and home. I received an interesting communication this morning. Oh? Marcus Stone. He's requested permission to establish a research center on the border between our territories and Moonstone Packlands. Apparently, his legislative work has evolved into something more comprehensive, a think tank focused on supernatural governance reform. The mention of her former fiancé's name no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. 2 years of genuine happiness with Alexander had transformed old wounds into simple historical facts. Interesting, but no longer emotionally relevant. "What kind of research center?" she asked, her tone carrying professional curiosity rather than personal concern. "Partnership dynamics, transparency protocols, legal frameworks for equality-based alliances. He wants to study our success and create replicable models for other communities." Alexander paused, his expression thoughtful. He also mentioned wanting to ensure his daughter grows up in a world where her future partnerships won't be limited by outdated traditions. Evelyn felt a flicker of something that might have been approval. The Marcus she had known 2 years ago had been too focused on managing his image to consider larger implications of his choices. If he was now thinking about systemic change rather than personal advancement, perhaps his failures had taught him something valuable after all. "His daughter must be walking by now," she observed. "Time has a way of changing perspectives. Would you be comfortable with him establishing operations so close to our territory?" The question was asked without pressure or expectation, simply Alexander seeking her honest opinion before making decisions that might affect them both. It was one of the 1,000 small ways he demonstrated respect for her judgment and feelings, never assuming, always asking, consistently treating her as an equal partner in all things. "I think it could be beneficial," she said, after considering the implications. "If Marcus has genuinely learned from his mistakes, his research could prevent other couples from experiencing what we went through. And if he hasn't," she shrugged elegantly, "then his proximity will make it easier to monitor his activities." Alexander's laugh was rich and genuine. "Ever the strategist. This is why I fell in love with your mind first." "Just my mind?" she asked, moving closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Well, your mind and your absolutely devastating ability to make me forget I'm supposed to be a dignified alpha when you look at me like that." The kiss that followed was soft and thorough, carrying the kind of easy intimacy that had developed between them over months of honest communication and shared experiences. When they broke apart, both were breathing slightly harder, and the pendant at her throat was glowing with contentment. "We should probably respond to Marcus's request before I get distracted by how good you smell," Alexander murmured against her temple. "Probably," she agreed, though she made no immediate move to step away from his warmth. "What did you want to tell him?" "That he can establish his research center on the conditions that all findings be made publicly available, and that he submit quarterly reports on his activities to the Alliance Council." Alexander's hands had settled on her waist, with the familiarity of 2 years of marriage. Standard diplomatic protocols for any organization operating near sensitive territories. Reasonable. Though you might want to add a clause about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries with Alliance personnel. Evelyn's smile carried a hint of mischief. "We wouldn't want any awkward attempts at reconciliation disrupting our territorial stability. I don't think that's a concern anymore. From what I understand, Marcus has found his own path to contentment. Different from ours, but apparently sustainable for him." The conversation was interrupted by Maya's arrival, carrying the diplomatic pouch that had become a daily fixture of their expanded operations. Alliance business now spanned 4 continents, with requests for mediation, consultation, and partnership advice arriving from supernatural communities around the world. The European delegation confirmed their attendance at next month's summit, Maya reported with her characteristic efficiency. "They're particularly interested in discussing integration protocols for mixed species partnerships. Apparently your success has inspired some unconventional alliances." Evelyn exchanged glances with Alexander, both recognizing the implications. Their model had originally been designed for werewolf communities, but if other supernatural species were adapting their principles, the potential for change was even greater than they had imagined. "Unconventional how?" Alexander asked. "Vampire-werewolf partnerships primarily. A few witch-shifter alliances, even some human supernatural couples seeking legal recognition for their relationships. Maya's expression remained professionally neutral, but Evelyn caught the underlying excitement. The summit could establish precedent for supernatural civil rights on a global scale. The magnitude of what they had set in motion was sometimes overwhelming. What had begun as a desperate political alliance to prevent territorial war had evolved into a movement that was reshaping the fundamental structures of supernatural society. Schedule preliminary meetings with the delegation leaders, Evelyn decided. We'll need to understand their specific challenges before we can develop appropriate protocols. After Maya left, Evelyn found herself back at the windows, contemplating the strange paths that had led to this moment. Marcus's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been necessary. It had taught her exactly what she required in a partner and prepared her to recognize real worth when it was offered honestly. "Penny for your thoughts," Alexander said, joining her at the window. "Just thinking about how different everything could have been. If Marcus had been honest from the beginning, if he'd been the partner I thought he was, I might never have discovered what real partnership looks like." Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd made different choices? Sometimes, but wondering doesn't change anything. And honestly, I can't imagine being happier than I am right now. She leaned into his solid warmth, feeling the pendant pulse with deep satisfaction. "We built something beautiful together, Alexander. Not just our marriage, but this entire movement. People around the world are finding love and equality because we proved it was possible. We did do that, didn't we? We did, and we're just getting started." As evening approached, and they prepared for another diplomatic mission that would test their partnership abilities, Evelyn reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She had wanted a political alliance, and found true love instead. She had sought protection from territorial war, and discovered a calling that was transforming supernatural society itself. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and possibilities that neither of them could have imagined when they first negotiated the terms of their arrangement. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Two equals who had chosen each other freely and built something extraordinary from that choice. The silver pendant pulsed once more with warm, steady light, and Evelyn understood that this was not an ending, but a promise of adventures yet to come. Their love story had become a revolution, and the revolution was spreading across the world one honest partnership at a time. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from getting what you wanted, but from what you actually needed. Marcus had taught her what she wouldn't accept. Marcus learned the hard way that some choices create consequences that last a lifetime, but his story serves as a powerful reminder. When we betray those who trust us, we lose more than love. We lose the chance to become the person we were meant to be. Meanwhile, Evelyn's rejection at the altar became her greatest moment of strength. She showed the world that self-respect isn't negotiable, that real partnership requires honesty from day one, and that sometimes walking away is the most powerful choice you can make. Their story proves that every ending is someone else's beginning. While Marcus faced the consequences of his deception, Evelyn found the love she truly deserved with someone who saw her worth from the very start. If you enjoyed watching Evelyn choose herself over settling for betrayal, subscribe for more stories where protagonists refuse to accept less than they deserve. We explore the kind of supernatural romance where strength meets strength, where honesty builds unbreakable bonds, and where real love never asks you to diminish yourself. Thanks for experiencing this tale of empowerment, consequences, and finding your true equal. See you in the next story.